Hi, Dan. How are you today?
Good, and you?
Good.
Okay, let's give 1 or 2 more minutes for everybody that is going to join us today. Let's give them some time. Thank you, everybody that is already here. This is a very, very special class for us. A big challenge to have this class in English. So we are nervous, but we are happy to be here and try to explain to the rest of the world what's going on in our country. How are you feeling, Caro?
I'm feeling nervous, but it's important for me and for the project to Las Profes at this moment, and I'm so happy too.
Okay.
I think that start, suppose.
You think we can start? Okay. So welcome, everybody. This is Las Profes. It's a project that Caro and I created to try to change the world through education and tell the people around our country, our family members, our friends, and now around the world that learning and education doesn't have to be boring, and we want to contribute to a transformation of the country with education. Today, this is a special class in English because we wanted to reach a larger audience, and we're going to answer these 2 questions. What is the context of the current situation, and what has happened since the social manifestations began? A little bit about us. My name is Daniela Quijano, and I am accompanied by my colleague Carolina Sierra. We are both teachers. We both have our masters in education, and we created this space that is an open space for people of any political, social, and cultural background. And everybody's welcome here. At the end, we're going to have an open space to answer questions. So we really hope that you can participate and let us know what you think. Colombia has been in the public eye for a couple of months now due to the social manifestation and protests that began in April of this year. The media has focused on the consequences that this event has brought, what has been happening during, and all the consequences. We, as teachers, we wanted to explain a little bit more in detail the whole situation, going back in time to discuss the social, political, and economic context, in which all of this emerged. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat here.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This class is important because we want to share with foreign people the current situation in our country. Thank you for being here. In this opportunity, I want to start talking about the historical context and its influences on the current crisis. This is the first step. Colombia is a country located in South America with coasts in the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. It has different types of reliefs and diverse natural resources. This is important because these geographic characteristics are related to the causes that provoke the armed conflict. During the 20th century, Colombia had deep social, economic, political, and cultural transformation that explain part of the current disagreements and the demands of the population to the ongoing government. Through the second half of the century, Colombian political participation has been reduced to only political parties, liberal and conservador. For this reason, different social groups did not have political participation, and that is so difficult. This situation, plus the deep inequalities that persist nowadays in the country, were the reason that triggered the creation of different guerrilla groups. In the beginning, guerrilla groups were organized in rural areas around the country and started their fight against the Colombian government. Some historians agree that it was the beginning of the armed conflict that lasted for more than 50 years, and that is a huge problem. These maps show you the location of conflict zones today and how violence affects civilians living in these areas, especially the impact of forced displacement. According to the UN data, Colombia is still the country with the largest internal displacement in the world. Danny, please, next slide, please. Okay. So maps, more maps. So by the 60s in Colombia, the armed conflict became more complex due to the appearance of drug trafficking phenomenon. You can see in the right map this phenomenon. These new elements have different consequences, such as increased violence in the rural areas and the appearance of more illegal armed groups. Besides, it became an income source for guerrillas. As a result of the confrontation among guerrilla groups, new groups of drug dealers, and Colombian armed forces, emerged a new illegal group called paramilitares or AUC. This group focused their action on fighting against guerrillas groups and were financed by politicians, entrepreneurs, and social groups in the country. It increased violence levels affecting civilians. Danny will explain this information in more detail later. To summarize, the armed conflict in Colombia has caused the death of less 202,000 people in the confrontations. It has involved all forms of violence against the population, and the consequence that the armed conflict has caused to the country include the increase in poverty and inequality that are main demands of Colombians on the streets nowadays. Next.
So this has been like the larger context that Colombia has been immersed in for, like Carolina said, almost more than 50 years, right? All the elected presidents during this long period of time and their governments have dealt with the situation in many different ways, most of them choosing to respond in an armed way to the developing guerrillas. That's why it's important to keep this in mind, because that's why we call it an internal conflict, because there has been an armed response also from the government. Today, we will focus on the last 20 years of governments in dealing with the situation. The president what we're going to start with is the one in the picture that is quite known internationally also, that is Álvaro Uribe Vélez. His presidential period was from 2002 to 2010. He was elected in 2002 amidst one of the most difficult parts of the internal armed conflict. He had been mayor of Medellin, governor of Antioquia, that is one of the most important regions of the country. His campaign was based on the internal security through authority, criticizing corruption, the transaction of political favors, and his motto, like it's there in the picture, is strong or firm hand, depending on how you want to translate it, big heart, and that clearly establishes posture towards the internal conflict. He created this policy called Seguridad Democrática, or democratic security, that it was a whole scheme that encompassed, among others, a network of vigilance to help with the intelligence services, offering rewards in exchange of information. He created areas of rehabilitation for the deserted illegal combatants. This is one of the most emblematic programs that was developed in his 2 terms. He was reelected, but it has also been one of the most criticized. Specifically, it was because this was a new radical approach to the conflict, and it's really started to be evident right at the beginning of his mandate in October of 2002 with the so-called Operación Orión in one of Medellin's most violent neighborhoods, La Comuna 13. That was ruled by Las FARC, and there was an armed operation by the public forces, by the army, to look for alleged guerrilleros that generated a major traumatism in the area. One of the most common phrases that you will hear about Uribe's period was that he was able to return safety to the country's roads, and how he gave hope for the middle and upper classes in returning to their properties outside of the urban areas. He accomplished this by doubling the presence of the army on the roads and publicly rescuing the kidnapped citizens that were held by the guerrillas. And another important element of this period is that one of the negotiations that were started with the armed groups that Caro mentioned that was the negotiation with the paramilitary group, the AUC, Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia. and they established a negotiation table granting a demilitarized zone for them to regroup during the negotiations. That is an element that was also very criticized of these negotiations. What is important to keep in mind and to discuss about Uribe and why is going to be and why is relevant to talk about him right now is that the image that was built around him endures until this day. He remains as this messianic eternal president. He's still called like a president who saved the country from Las FARC. This is like the image that a lot of the people of the country have, and that his image and his self surpassed even political parties because he was elected from one party and then he created a new party, and when that party no longer served his purpose, he created another party like is today the Centro Democrático, Democratic Center, that is the party in which Duque, our current president, was elected from.
Yes, another element important is peace process. During the 20th century, some presidents established peace negotiation with guerrilla groups, a total 9 in this period. However, most of them failed because governments degraded the agreements and did not work to improve the deep causes and the social problem of the less favored classes, like a peace process with AUC. In 2020, the government of Juan Manuel Santos, president of Colombia for 2 consecutive periods, revealed himself against his political party position, in this moment, political party La U, towards the guerrillas, and began the most historical peace process in Colombia with the FARC guerrilla groups. The next one, Danny. Yeah. After more than 4 years of negotiation in Oslo and Havana, the president and the representatives of the FARC signed the first agreements. However, the president held a plebiscite for citizens to support the agreements. In this moment, the strong tensions and political division caused by the peace process, plus the campaign against the plebiscite led by Centro Democrático with Álvaro Uribe and his head, made the citizen not support these agreements. For these reasons, the government, the representative of FARC, and the commission representative, the No Borders, meet to adjust some of established new agreements. After this conversation, the final document was signed and ratified by Congress in 2016. Okay, but what is important is because nowadays the implementation of the agreements is in crisis because of the opposition of the current government to what was agreed upon. It has become an additional reason for the social discontent at this moment. For that, it's important, this context. And yeah.
So we arrived to our current president. But to continue a little bit with what Caro was saying about Juan Manuel Santos, with his re-election in 2014, during this whole process of renegotiation, well, he was re-elected in 2014 against the political party of Uribe, that was, in that case, Oscar Iván Zuluaga. Although Santos won, the Uribismo, how it is called nowadays, like the people that follow Álvaro Uribe, had an important win, nevertheless, because they obtained 100 of the seats of the Senate from the 2 chambers, from the Cámara de Representantes and from the Senate, including 1 seat for Uribe himself, so he became a senator. The triumph of the no, like Carolina was explaining, was also a sign of the re-strengthening of the Uribismo and this political polarization that was really strong at the moment. This is key in understanding how a candidate like Duque won the elections in 2018, 4 years later, because he had very little political experience. He only had 4 years as a senator, and he was quite unknown. his campaign was based almost exclusively on his connection to Uribismo, like to Uribe specifically. We will see some images later. And that resonated with this large, fan base, maybe, that the ex-president has. He campaigned for the return of how things were during Uribe's mandate, for example, a necessity to reduce violence through the strengthening of the armed force. His proposals included important modification to the peace agreements, like Carolina was saying, specifically in the subject of political participation of the reintegrated guerrilla. He proposed an orange economy. This was the name that he gave for the economic growth, which aimed for a smaller state, and a firm hand, like we were discussing before, in security issues and a closer relationship with the United States. If we see these images here, this is important to understand some of the the claims that are being made during the strike that we're going right now. For example, this one over here, it says menos impuestos más salario mínimo. It translates to less taxes, more minimum salary. So that was one of his main slogans during the campaign, that he wanted to reduce the taxes. We see here in this image how he used Uribe's image as part of his campaign, and how he was always seen in public with him, and Uribe defended him by saying that he's his chosen one, like el que dice Uribe was the things that were being said. An important element of this polarization that we have been talking about was the strategy of using Venezuela as an excuse for not electing the competitor of Duque, that was Gustavo Petro. That was the two people that were running for presidents during the 2018 elections. Petro was more of left-wing candidate than Duque, that is a right-wing candidate. And Venezuela has been having a really long crisis due to the failure of how the government planned on that left-wing program that they wanted to install. So around the world, and specifically here in Colombia, having Venezuela so close, there have been using the case of Venezuela as an excuse or as a weapon for fighting against left-wing programs. So that's why in this image it says, no quiero vivir como venezolano, I don't want to live like a Venezuelan, Duque presidente. So this is like the context of the president that we have right now that won the elections in 2018. And one of the most important elements to discuss that connects to the following parts and that enables the discussion of the social manifestation is that in 2018, he proposed, the government came up with a ley de financiamiento, a financing law, which is another term for a tax reform. For example, some of the relevant elements that were proposed was the gradual reduction of income tax for enterprises and a wealth tax of 1% and a IVA or VIT for sugar drinks. So he did come through with the part of the reduction of the taxes, but from the enterprises.
Yes. In this context, in 2019, people expressed their discontent with the President Duque through different manifestations. They demanded the president to fulfill his campaign purpose, referring to lower taxes and higher salaries, especially young people who are the most affected by the unequal economic conditions in the country, especially the unequal economic condition for this part of the population. In this context, compared to the other countries in the region, such as Chile or Mexico, Colombia has not had a protest tradition. For that reason, the magnitude of the protest, known as in Spanish 21N, in English 21N, and the current one is historical because in Colombia the different social movements had never acted together. This can be explained by the persistence of the armed conflict, the political division, and the existing prejudice about protesters belonging to the less favored classes. At this point, this situation represents a huge change in the way Colombian people interact with the government and their appreciation of diverse ways of protest like cacerolazo, concentrations, artistic demonstrations, and street concerts, or, for example, open classes in the street, among others, like this, for example. They help people to understand the context, including various sectors of the population without class distinctions. The protest in this moment lasted for November 2019 to February 2020. Although the negotiations were organized between the street committee and the government, diverse social sectors never feel represented. And the government responds to many of the social demands with the repressions. Even the international community made a call to respect the protesters' human rights. However, with the arrival of the coronavirus pandemic and the lockdown policies, social movements disappeared, and the conversations obviously were cancelled. And that is the end of the 21N in this moment.
So what's going on now? What are the effects of all of these contexts that we have explained on the present moment crisis? So we know that all of these reclamations that were done in November 2019 were just not gone. Like what people wanted didn't like magically happen. Things continue to even get worse with the arrival of the pandemic, of course. That was enhanced, of course. The social crisis, the health crisis, the economic crisis was enhanced by this pandemic. And like what Caro said, all of the lockdown policies that were established in the country. We had the longest quarantine, one of the longest quarantines of the world, but still we are struggling with the health crisis. The national strike that we're going to talk about, the one that is going on right now, that here in Colombia we call it el paro, of the verb to stop, has lasted for more than a month, almost 48 days until date. There has been concentration, blockages, marches, mobilizations, assemblies, and we will see if this has brought any positive aspects. But first, we'll discuss like what has been like a really summarized timeline of all of this, of these strikes. So what has been discussed mostly is that tax reform that was proposed by the government. The tax reform was proposed in mid-April 2021. The government presents this Ley de Solidaridad Sostenible that roughly translates to a sustainable solidarity law that wanted to collect a lot of the money that was not missing but was lacking from the national budget. They wanted to collect 23.4 billion pesos, which is a lot of money. And they that's why they needed the money, because of the whole crisis that was enhanced by the pandemic. So some of the proposals of some of the things that were included in this law was, for example, IVA or VAT, that is like the consumption tax for services for the higher classes. The higher pensions will also have to pay a wealth tax. And one of the most difficult ones was that they proposed a wealth tax for people that earned more than 2.420,000 pesos. That is roughly $690, which is not such a high wage. So a lot of people that were not paying a wealth tax at the moment will have to start paying, which is the middle class. So basically all of these reforms that the government was proposing were aimed for the middle class. So of course this caused the first announcement of the manifestation from many sectors of society in the 28th of April against this tax reform. This caused a response from the government, and the 29th, the government said that what has happened in the manifestations, that the protesters that were being violent, and they titled it as vandalismo criminal, as a criminal vandalism, which caused also the militarization of many cities, including, for example, Cali, which has been like the nucleus of a lot of difficult situations recently. So, in the 2nd of May, after all these manifestations and discussions, the government asked for the withdrawal of the project, and the Minister of Finance, that is the one that proposed this law, resigns. That is Alberto Carrasquilla here. Manifestations still continue, blockages still continue, and it continues to happen in around 50 cities and smaller cities of the country. And the discussion is now aimed towards a health reform that also the government was trying to pass, a law for reformation of the health system, which was also going to affect negatively, especially the middle class of the country. The response again of the government was not respecting of the law of protest, like the right of protest, and for example, Cali remained militarized, and the confrontations between the public forces and the manifestators became even more violent, and the violence sharpened between these two sides, which is one of the most controversial and important thing to discuss, and is like the reason why it has had to become so violent. This is specifically important with what we're going to discuss at the end, and is that protests, there's a right of protest here in the country, but like Caro said, we don't have a large tradition of protesting and of manifestations in the country. So this huge protest that started to happen was very new to the country, especially to the government. So the reaction from the government was not ideal in this type of situations, causing a lot of human rights allegations against the armed force and against the public forces of how they have been responding to the protesters. This is a ONG, Temblores ONG, that is like a non-governmental organization that has been following through this platform called Grita what has been the numbers of like cases of violence in the country during this strike. So this is information from April 28th to May 28th, so the first month of the PARO. For example, we have that there has been 3,789 cases of police brutality, 1,248 victims of physical violence by the police, and 45 victims of homicides. 45 people until the 28th of May have died, allegedly committed by the police. They're still being investigated, but just the number 45 people being killed during protests is worrying. Another concerning case are the arbitrary arrest, that is 1,649 people, especially since here in Colombia, not only in Colombia, in Latin America, there is this large, tradition sounds not like the right word, but it's this tradition of people going missing, people disappearing. It's something that has been very common in other moments of Latin American history, such as in Argentina or in Chile. So people being arbitrarily arrested is worrying because of this background that we have. But sexual violence has also happened, firearm shootings by the police, 65 victims with injuries to their eyes. People have lost their eyes in those whole protests. Of course, it wouldn't be fair to not say what has been done by the protesters. There has been public damages of the public and private property of billions of pesos, which is also concerning because that is part of the public. It's public property, so it's going to come out of everybody's taxes. Here in Bogota, for example, where Carolina and I live, there has been damages to Transmilenio, that is the main source of transportation of the city. So there has been violence in both cases. There has been thefts, people that have come in and robbed properties. So that has also happened. So in general, violence has occurred and it's something that has to be discussed and addressed, and that's what Caro is going to explain later. So in general, there has been like a lot of violence during this PARO, the strike. This is in Spanish, but now this one claims that there are 60 people murdered, and the latest one was 45, but 60 it's another that was made, but the same ONG posted this number in like with side by side with Indepaz, that is like a institute for the peace verification. Well, 43 of those 60 murders were like allegedly committed by the public forces. 46 people have been like lost their lives, like we said, sexual aggression, and there has been 2 members of the public forces murdered. So this is like the numbers of what has going on in the strike, and we are yet to find a solution, like what Caro is going to explain.
Okay. In fact, in recent weeks, due to all forms of violence against the protests, Inter-American Commission on Human Rights arrived in the country to observe the situation. As a result of this visit, the government is waiting the report issued by Commission in order to evaluate and respond to its recommendations, especially, obviously, police abuse and others that Danny explained it. Finally, on May 16, representatives of the government and the Strike Committee began negotiations to solve the social discontents. However, several social groups said they weren't represented by the committee and the representatives could not reach worthy agreements. For this reason, protesters remained in the streets. And this is all now, Danny. We hope that this summary of the current situation in our country has allowed you to understand a bit more the causes and development of the social demonstrations in Colombia. Really, for us, it's so important your attention, and we hope you can follow us on our social media to attend incoming events, for example, the next class. We invite you to in the next open class, which is going to be in Spanish. And we are going to talk about Colombian health and retirement systems. That is important in this context and to understand more this situation.
I don't know if we haven't received any comments and questions yet, but if you do, and if you want, we are open here to answering any questions or comments or things that you want to check, information that you would like to check as well. And if not, thank you very much for watching us. Muchas gracias. This was a small experiment that we had to see if we could get people from around the world to learn a little bit more about our country and the situation, and to make it evident for everybody that what is going on is important and it is necessary to discuss.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're going to end the transmission, and if you had any questions after this, we will be receiving them in our social media that is now on screen. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, Caro. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.